Hey everybody, it's the Wild AF Mother channel, and it's time for a 23-week update for baby number 3. Just a few things have started, like I started getting colostrum coming in at about week 21, and the way you can test that is just like take your breast in your hand and just kind of squeeze, like take a lot of it in your hand and squeeze down toward the nipple, and if like clear beads of fluid come out, that's probably colostrum. And it's kind of sticky and it's kind of salty, so that's what that is. And usually it shows up at about, sometime after week 20. Some people might get it a little earlier, especially if they've had a baby born recently. Be like had two close together babies. But yeah, colostrum can take a while to come in for some people. I think it's normal to maybe even not even get colostrum up until toward the end of the third trimester. I have to check on that to see where the normal range is, but this one is just in normal range. I'm getting that a little bit of tummy fur, because that happens because the baby is growing that fine, like really fine body hair that I think it partly helps to keep it warm, and it's just part of its development. It just grows some fluffy, downy fur, and so I'm getting like a little bit of that on my belly. It's just kind of a blonde little fuzz, and I'm getting just the tiniest bit of the linea nigra. I feel like it showed up one day and then disappeared a little bit. I think the hormone levels are adjusting and it will come in stronger pretty soon. I started getting my classic, I get some like SPD type pain. I think that's SPD type pain because it sort of sounds like the descriptions I've heard of it. I know some gals have SPD really bad where they can barely walk. Luckily, with my first two babies, I only had that to the extent that I almost couldn't walk, and it only lasted a couple of days, and then it eased up. So this time it has been milder than the first two pregnancies. I don't know if it's because I'm not sitting in a chair like doing office work as much, or maybe I don't know what's different this time, but it was just milder. I do have that burning sensation in the front of the pelvis where your pelvic bones come together in the front. You have this chunk of cartilage called the pubic symphysis, and that starts to dissolve as your pregnancy gets farther along because your body has to be able to, your pelvis has to be able to kind of open up and let the baby out. So that has been kind of sore. It burns, and it's affecting my ability to get comfortable in bed a little bit, but I use a body pillow, which I use whether I'm pregnant or not because it's so comfy, and that helps a bit. So a few things you can do if you're experiencing this SPD, where SPD has more to do, from what I can tell, with like hip. It causes more hip pain, like further up toward the crest, and it's sort of has to do with the way the sacral and pelvic bones are aligned and come together in there. And if things aren't quite aligned, it's going to cause you some pain possibly. And a lot of folks go to chiropractors and it really helps them. So if you can afford that, or if you have the opportunity, maybe look at a chiropractor to just crack that into place. And I have been to a chiropractor for other things, and I can say that, like, if you're apprehensive about visiting one, I would say you don't have to worry too much because, like, sometimes a pop or an adjustment can be a little bit of pain. Most adjustments I've had have not been painful. They're just a relief of pressure. But even in the case where there's a little pain with it, the relief you get afterward is so much bigger than any bad part of dealing with getting the adjustment. Anyway, so a few things just in daily movement that you can do to reduce SPD pain. And let me just look up what that is an acronym for right quick because I forget the full word. Oh, symphysis pubis dysfunction. So SPD is symphysis pubis dysfunction, and it's something that pregnant women deal with fairly commonly. So some tips are try to move your legs together when you move them instead of one at a time. Try to avoid taking huge steps where you're separating you know, the sides of your pelvis apart from each other, or like taking stairs two at a time. That is stuff that can really inflame and exacerbate the problem. Using a body pillow, I mentioned, is really good. You can apply an ice pack to your pelvic area to bring inflammation down. Stay lightly active, but avoid, you know, higher impact activities maybe that can cause you pain, and just pay attention to the pain and don't push it. Take rest breaks and wear good shoes, supportive shoes. Um, those things can all really help if you're dealing with it. It's no fun. It's really can be debilitating if you have it bad. So, what else do we got for our update? I've had a little trouble falling asleep, like just kind of that light. It's not insomnia like a clinical level, but it's just feeling a little bit of extra energy where I can't fall asleep too well. And like then when I fall asleep, I feel like I have to pee, so I wake up immediately. And that'll happen like 3 to 5 times. And then when I finally feel like I'm all peed out and I lie down and go to sleep, maybe a child will cry from the other room, just wake up for a minute and need something, like need their to be covered back up, or just need a little attention, and then I'm up again for a little while. So that's been a bit of an issue, but my spouse is really great about letting me sleep in, especially just on nights where he notices I'm restless after he's noticed that I'm restless. I did finally find, last time I mentioned I went to a big box store where there was usually a cuff, a blood pressure cuff, and they did not have it there anymore. So I went to another store, a grocery store chain, and did find one tucked away in a corner, and I used that to check my blood pressure. I'm at 99 over 57, so that's okay right now. Typically, where you want to start looking out is if your blood pressure, hold on. I always get diastolic and systolic confused. Which one's which, right? It's the bottom number is the diastolic, and the systolic is on top. So if you're systolic, the top number is above about 130. That's where you should start really paying attention to it. I think it's not. It just depends on which clinic you're talking to or which provider, but generally it's like 130 is considered like a level you want to look out, and then let's see, like 140 is considered more dire, like get maybe, I think 140 is the place where they start medicating, commonly, like start medicating even a pregnant woman, which, you know, we try to stay away just in case from a lot of medication, but at that point it's worth, you know, applying some pharma to that possibly, or really pharma, you don't have to start with pharma. There's like hibiscus tea can lower blood pressure. There are a bunch of, first always of course look up your home remedies, like if you feel that your blood pressure is creeping upward and you're getting up to that 120 area, like maybe higher, and you're usually lower, you really also have to pay attention to your own baseline. My baseline's really low. It's like 50s and 60s as the on the bottom, and the top number is like 90s for me usually, or even upper 80s. So right now I'm a little elevated, but my heart has to work harder to pump the extra blood, so that kind of makes sense. But if you're getting into a range that's like 20 to 30 points above your usual, and that concerns you, you can always try just Google up a list of home remedies. It won't hurt. Most of them are really cheap, and many of the examples that you'll read are indeed backed by the science. People will like to say, oh, that's, it's old wives' tale, not like plants and herbs and roots don't work, when it's like, what do they think pharma comes from? Right? It comes from that shit. It comes from plants and herbs. So people who say that just really have a black and white way of thinking. They don't really know anything about the science. And if you ask them, well, okay, where's your knowledge coming from? Did you study botany in college? I like to pull that one out because people put so much value on formal education, and then I can say, well, I studied chemistry and botany in college, which I did, and so and microbiology. So when they start to tell me that I'm being stupid, but they're folks who really appeal to authority a lot, then I just pull out my own appeals to authority, and then they get mad. But hey, that's how the truth works. It doesn't depend on us accepting it or us knowing it. It just is what it is. So always check your list of little home remedies you can try. You never know what might work. And by trying these things, you're actually contributing to the sciences, like you are the scientist. And our bodies are our science projects, especially when we're pregnant. Shit can get weird, so. Yeah, so my blood pressure is fine. I'm just going to keep on checking it. What else we got? Oh, I told my husband that I was really thinking about the fact that I wanted to try a birth stool this time because, frankly, it's mostly because when I'm in labor and things are getting really intense, like it's transition time, and then beyond transition, I like I think it's most women, tend to defecate when I'm pushing. So, and I'm not live on my blog yet, but I wrote a blog post specifically about this, and the part about pooping was in the first sentence. So that's going to be great for SEO. I think that might catch some eyes. It's not live yet, but when it is, as I've said before, I'm going to put the link up. I've got a kind of a full plate, so I want to go live on that, and then I'll get y'all a link. And anywho, I just don't want to have to think about, I have to poop, but I want to do that on a toilet. I don't want to do it in the bed. I don't want to do it anywhere else. I just can't bring myself quite to do that. But I don't want to be sitting on the toilet to actually give birth because it's just harder to see. It's harder to catch with the bowl. It's just in the way. And so, just thinking about birth stool. And my husband is like, well, why don't we get one of those? You can get one of those shower chairs for disabled folks that has the cutout already in it. It's like a U hole cut in the seat of the chair. And those cost like $60 to $70, which is okay. But then the next day after we talked about it, he found an abandoned basically just a dinner table chair. A really nice wide one with the back broken off out by someone's trash. So he grabbed that, brought it home, took I think it was a jigsaw, and just cut out that U. He used the toilet seat as a template, like to trace, and then cut that out. So we have a birth stool now. For all I know, in the moment, for whatever reason, I won't use it or I won't want to use it, but I feel like I will want to use it, just so I can poop and then move the pads away that are soiled and replace them and continue to push through that. And I don't have to worry about moving locations to deposit various things from my body. Because having to play a balancing act while you're in the throes of transition is distressing. Something weird. I got a bruise on my butt. It was like a contusion. It was like, I don't know, a couple inches across, and it was like, the pattern was kind of a spattery bruising pattern. It was really weird. And my husband looked at it, and we were thinking about what could have caused that. And I figured it's this, like, at the playground, I was watching the kids, they were playing, and I sat on a bench that's made out of, the metal that's like in a bunch of little diamonds. It's like a crisscross pattern. I think what was up there is I just sat like cross-legged, so all my pressure on one side, on one butt cheek, and then it made a weird bruise. This indicates to me that I need to probably start taking some vitamin K. I was going to wait until closer to the birth, like months 8 and 9, to start start taking vitamin K in an effort to make sure that my blood will clot appropriately when I give birth, and when the placenta detaches, that my body can clot that blood to avoid a hemorrhage. And I did that with my last baby and didn't have bleeding problems. But now I think from that bruise that maybe I should go ahead and start taking that. So I've taken a few of those capsules. Like I take one of my, I don't have the bottle in here right now, but I just add it into my daily, or like every other day I'll take it, and I haven't noticed any more bruising, so we'll see if that continues to work. So there you have it. There are the updates, the 23-week update, and of course got the obligatory bump pic in the thumbnail. And finally, I'll just wrap up by talking about a little bit more about free birth, like one topic that I'm touching on it. I'm writing up my blog posts, as I mentioned, and I'm touching on some of the psychological reasons why the structures for surrounding birth and women and gestation exist, and some of the psychological background of that for both the providers and for the customers that seek the help of the provider. So one thing that's tempting, I think, if you're thinking about doing a wild pregnancy, it's tempting to say, how about I just go to a physician, and I have a physician, on deck, and I maybe go to them for an appointment or two, or maybe I go in to confirm the pregnancy, and then maybe I'll have an ultrasound at 20 weeks, or you'll pick a couple things that you want to do, and you'll go in for those appointments only, and then you won't engage otherwise. And I think that's a tempting option. And I'm sure that some folks can make that work depending on who their provider is and what they're willing to do to be firm with that person and that crew. But I think that in most cases, we're going to have an easier time just completely detaching from it. Because here's what happens. And I know this because I've read this story 100 times from different women and a few gals in person, but of course when you're online you can really filter and read a ton of accounts of women like all in one go. So I use a lot of that for my data and my stories that I pull from. But so many women were like, I just decided I was going to go low contact with my healthcare provider, like just go to some appointments and keep it surface and do what I want. And then but just even doing that much, they really got muscled. They really ended up doing a bunch of stuff they didn't want to do, even if they only went to a physician 2, 3, 4 times through their whole pregnancy. And they were, browbeaten, they were put down, they were told they were being irresponsible, all that classic stuff. So if I had to just give a general advice just off the bat without knowing anything about the individual that's asking, it's just as a general bit of advice, I would say just don't go at all, because if you go at all, they're gonna really try to muscle you as much as possible. This is their livelihood, right? This is their bread and butter, and they so that's the financial motivation on their part, and they also really have a power and ego motivation, which we know from dealing with physicians how insane their egos are, like how ridiculous it can be. And they really feel entitled to your body. They feel entitled to looking at, touching, examining your body, kind of like it's sort of, it's sort of the woman's body is society's property, and it's particularly the medical establishment's property because they know more about your body than you do. And that's the position they take. And even in cases where the provider doesn't really have the wherewithal about him or herself to admit this on a conscious level, they really live by it. And they do feel entitled to voyeur your experiences, to watch you in very vulnerable states, to call in lots of people to stand there and stare at you when you're in a really vulnerable state. And a lot of, tons of women will say, oh, you won't care when the time comes, like your dignity goes out the window. But to that I say, just because you're in a place where there's something more important to you than your own dignity in the moment does not mean that your dignity is not of the utmost importance. In fact, when you're in a place where your dignity has to sit by the wayside as far as your own priorities, then those around you who love you should be there to uphold your dignity for you and make sure that it stays intact for you. That's what someone who loves you does. And these people, like medical staff, a lot of women will kind of get a bit of a Stockholm syndrome with them because they're like, oh, my baby could die, it could be so dangerous. And that the fear turns the medical professional into this hero automatically. And then they start thinking, sort of a damsel in distress, especially women who have a male provider and they have a husband who's not particularly supportive. They'll displace some feelings of love and affection onto that provider. That happens a lot. I think it's something that isn't talked about, but there have been some women who admit, like, oh, I fell in love with my OB, And that gets weird fast. I mean, I'm not criticizing the women so much as I'm criticizing the system that it creates. It creates, a population of women who are underserved. We don't get the nurture and the attention we should get on a daily basis, just as human beings. And then once we're pregnant, sometimes people will even take an attitude, husbands or just people will take an attitude of like, oh, you think you're going to get special attention? Well, I'm extra not going to give you special attention and not even going to pay any mind. And I'm going to treat you like, even more like, oh, you can handle everything. And well, why don't just go do it yourself kind of attitude. Like, you're fine. What? Like, kind of pretend the pregnancy isn't there. I've had people do that to me, and I know, I luckily, my spouse doesn't do that. He's really more supportive, but I've had, yeah, people just, you can tell that they're thinking the last thing in the world I'm going to do is acknowledge your pregnancy. It's like, that's okay. It's not about for other people. It's not for other people to acknowledge, but they start getting hostile a little bit, like sort of passive hostility. And the clinics will do this too. They'll kind of go, it's funny, they can't really pick a lane. They'll say, you need to come in here and get medical care because having a baby is super serious. You can die, which you can, but not in the huge numbers that they, it's not it's not the average woman dying of this. The average woman handles this just fine. It's all about paying attention to the signs your body gives you. But they'll say, get in here, no matter who you are, no matter what's going on, and be kind of panic a little bit, be afraid, and come in here. But as soon as you do come in, they kind of act like, oh, what? You're fine. Oh, everything's like, what? What's the problem? You're totally fine. And especially after you have the baby, it's kind of a, well, you're on your own now. There are no checkups for a postpartum mother. The checkups are all for the baby. And then they're like, there's just this attitude of, don't expect to get any special treatment. You're fine. You just had a baby, but, and that's such a big deal that you had to come in here, but don't expect any help. So it's like, pick a lane there, guys. Either it's a big deal and you need to care for me and treat me with loving care and kindness and really support me physically, emotionally, or maybe it's not that too big of a deal and like you should pay some attention to what's going on, but everything's going to be okay, and let's act that way. Let's treat it like everything's going to be okay. You got to pick one or the other. You can't have it both ways. A big part of having power for the medical professional is having access. Access is huge. If they don't have access to you, they feel that you've cheated them, that you have taken away something that is rightfully theirs. You've taken away the moment where they get to look upon you in your vulnerability and tell you what to do, and deign to tell you what to do and do you some, massive favor of saving you and saving your baby, and you deprive them of that delusion, and that makes them very angry. And something I see a lot online related to this is a lot, more and more lately, over the past few years, there are all these messages that are like, because birth plans have become popular, there are a lot of messages sort of in a response to that are, yeah, have your birth plan, put your birth plan together, but don't be too, don't be too committed to it. Be willing to throw it out the window. So they're like, yeah, sure, write one up, but be willing to let anyone with a letter after their name, with letters after their name, grab it and just chuck it in the trash. So this is really not the way to treat a birth plan. A birth plan really needs to be respected as, as far as anyone else is concerned, it's the be-all, end-all. The mother is the one who should change that plan as she sees fit. No one else gets to change that plan. So if someone says to a woman, yeah, you have to change this birth plan right now because your baby could die. And she says, well, I don't see it that way, and I'm not going to change this. That should be respected. In fact, they shouldn't have begun with the lies anyway. Most of those, your baby's going to die, is a lie. A lot of times, the distress the baby's under is due to being given Syntocin for labor induction. And then, the Syntocin reduces the effect of the oxytocin in your body, and then, the Syntocin, it doesn't. I scratch that. The Syntocin makes more pain, which means you'll, we're more likely to ask for an epidural, and the epidural reduces the effect of the oxytocin on the body, and then that means we need more syntocin to get a stronger contraction, and then more pain. It's the cycle around and around until the baby is in distress, and they actually call this pit to distress, and it's pit to distress is actually used as something that physicians will tell the staff, like, to do, essentially, to pit to distress. And then at that point they say, baby's not getting enough oxygen, we have to do a C-section. Well, then the mother goes home with this whole story, this whole dramatic story. It's kind of like, it makes their lives exciting. There's a lot of psychological stuff in there. And the physician will, send them away with this whole damsel in distress that was rescued storyline, when the truth is that the interventions the hospital or the clinic and the hospital took were what caused the issues in the first place. There's really no reason to be inducing any woman, except for a very rare outlying cases where we're looking at 43 to 44-week pregnancies. And even then, it's not always. It just depends, again, on the symptoms you're experiencing and, like, when things feel wrong. Yeah, sometimes things can go wrong, but what's happening is, like, a way bigger percentage is actually getting induced than is having real problems. So women are getting tired of being pregnant by 38 weeks. I get it. But, where did the whole do what's best for your baby line go? They'll pull that out and say, well, do what's best for your baby. It's not about you. Just forget about yourself line, until it comes time that you use it back against them for something they're talking about, and suddenly that's no longer a valid bit of advice, right? So really what's best for a baby is to leave the baby alone until it wants to come, in almost every case. Sometimes it'll come a little later. And you know what accounts for this, actually? A lot of this can be accounted for, like babies that come late, babies that come early. Due dates are really silly, actually, because here, for one example, I don't have a 28-day cycle, I have a 27-day cycle, which means my babies come a little earlier because the cycle completes the 9 cycles. It's actually 10 moon cycles, I think, isn't it? Including the ovulation period before the egg actually meets sperm. So it's 10 moon cycles, and you have the baby. My moon cycles are shorter, whereas some women have a longer 31-day cycle. These women are going to have pregnancies that go longer. This is not even I've never heard about any physician or any medical staff accounting for the length of cycle when calculating a due date. You can go online and go pregnancy due date calculators, and there are plenty of calculators that will ask you your cycle length and factor it into when your due date should be. But I've never heard of a physician doing that. And to me, that's so rudimentary. It's kind of crazy that no one's doing that. Or I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure there are physicians that do it out there. I've just never heard of one. So that's the end of the 23-week update and the end of the discussion portion. Let's go ahead and do another update on week 26. Everything's going well. Thanks for listening. Leave your own comments about your own experiences in the comments and tell me what you think. And we'll just get back with it in a few weeks. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.